The problem with making my own decisions, I might make a mistake. That's not good for me, is it?
So this is the third week of February for 2020, and This Week in Common Sense. And you wrote 5 pieces this week, and it looks like you want to start talking about investments.
Yes, Save Me, Good and Hard was the title of our piece. That was Thursday, wasn't it? And basically, the SEC, not the Southeast Conference, the best football and arguably the best basketball conference in the nation, but not them. The SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission, is discussing new regulations that have been put forward that would make it difficult, cumbersome. You had to fill out all kinds of paperwork if you're just a regular investor who wants to buy mutual funds and other things that are deemed a little riskier than your average security. And the whole idea behind it is a really stupid idea. And the idea is that somehow the average person isn't smart enough to invest his own money, and the government has to create guardrails to tell people what to do. And of course, the problem always is that the people in government aren't geniuses either, always. And in fact, even if you're a genius, you can make the wrong call. And it's always better for people who are investing their money to make the decision and not have someone else make the decision for them. And that goes for investing money and just about everything else you could think of. And of course, the impulse with government is always the reverse. And this is not to say that that impulse doesn't, like anything else, isn't right sometimes. Nuclear weapons, given to toddlers, probably not a good idea. And maybe we need, if people start doing that, I think the government should step in and say, stop it. But for most things, let the people be free to do what they want to do. We created the government to protect us, but not to protect us from ourselves. It's a huge continual problem, and we shouldn't expect it to go away because, as I said a moment ago, that is the constant impulse of government, is to think up new ways that they can make things better, but usually by having controls over what we say and do. And a lot of times we're talking about political controls, free speech, and how dangerous that can be. But, financial controls, we want a system in which everyone has an equal opportunity to work hard and grow their wealth. And so having barriers that some folks who have, the resources to be a bigger investor can invest in, but not smaller investors. No. Can't happen.
And once again, this is an interesting case of government coming in to fix a problem that government has started. What is one of the reasons why normal people who have no knowledge of investing want to invest in various things? Because we live in the age of inflation, and the government has caused it such that you can't hoard gold in your bank vault. You have to do something with it, or you lose wealth.
Well, you might be okay with gold because if there's inflation, it will tend to keep even, but it won't grow like the truth is, even with all the ups and downs, and we've seen some big downs in our lifetimes, and we're not that old. We missed the Great Depression by several decades, 3. But we've seen the stock market be very volatile, but over time it has been very good. And you should expect that we're going to get better, smarter, wealthier, more knowledgeable as every day goes on. It's the problem with individual people is we also get older and parts start to wear out. But when you think of the economy and so on, we should be growing wealth. And so it's not such a bad investment to be investing in the stock market. Over time, it's proven to be a very, very good investment. It's just that there is risk, and nobody knows the future, and it's gambling. It's not the same gambling as, betting on the ponies. That's for certain. But it is a sort of gambling. It's also, though, the sort of thing that we want that vibrant economy, and for the government. I mean, to have a Securities and Exchange Commission, other than as sort of a police force to guard against fraud, is, to have an organization they're constantly trying to think of how we can regulate what I think could be a lot less regulated environment.
I noticed that your last lines are laissez-nous-faire, you condescending thugs. You enjoyed that. Well, it's kind of nice to see the word thug in the same sentence with laissez-nous-faire.
Well, part of this is the elite nature of it, that from on high, they're going to tell us what we can and can't do. But the other part of it is thuggery. It is that force. And sometimes we forget that and we ignore it. You don't want to confront all the time that you're being forced to do this and that. We like to have more placid, daily routines. But there is thuggery. And especially because this piece, was, I tried to be lighthearted and kind of get the humor of, hey, well, what can little old simple people like us American citizens do when our leaders don't tell us exactly what to do? So I wanted to end with a little bit more of a, pie to the face, maybe. So anyway, that's it. There is a lot of thuggery that goes on in government, and we've talked about it before, usually more in the criminal justice area. But anytime we say government should do something, we are in essence saying it is important enough that government should arrest people, put them in jail, potentially get into a scuffle. People have been killed, like Eric Gardner, for illegally selling cigarettes in New York. Clearly, he committed a crime, but I just don't want to see anybody killed for illegally selling a cigarette for 25 cents. I'm funny that way. And here, of course, no one's likely to be killed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, but the wealth that can be created in this country can be tamped down or can be allowed for some and not for others. And boy, when people talk about equality and wealth inequality, I bristle, because there's no problem with wealth inequality. Some of us don't want to work as hard as some of the wealthy people I know. And the only way really to make everything equal is to take. And I mean, there's been equal societies. Pol Pot's Cambodia, if you truly treasure equality, is arguably one of the most equal societies that ever existed, because they were all starving and being beaten to death, together. So that's not what we want. But when there is equality under the law, and so when we see things that create a dividing line in the economy, we should get hot and we should stop it. And that's, to me, it's a little bit like years ago, and I'm going to go on a slight tangent, but one of my favorite columns ever was "The Queen of England Makes Me Sick." I love that title too. It was so friendly and nice and inviting. It was a little provocative, arguably. But my whole point in that, which was at Town Hall, the least favorite column ever, I had the most negative feedback, because the Queen's a wonderful woman and she seems so nice. And it was almost as if the Queen had won World War II single-handedly, was kind of the vibe I got from some folks. But I looked at it and I thought, we hear all this talk about racism, which is, the kind of the bloodlines. And if you have one drop of this blood or that blood or whatever, this is how the world has been for centuries, and it's not good. And we should revolt against it. And we should be careful that sort of thinking not seep in to our present society. And yet then the Queen of England, then this was back, I think, in probably 2006 or 8 or who knows when, but years ago. But the Queen of England comes, Liz Windsor, and good old Liz. And everyone's, I read a couple of articles about how they were trying to explain to Americans how to behave and so on. And I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. And so I just basically said, this is everything that we campaign against, sometimes in ways and over issues that are tiny or not even really in this vein. We're super sensitive to it. And then we celebrate. I mean, what is the Queen of England except this very wealthy woman? And I understand she has to work a lot, waving and going to stupid functions and so on. Quit your job. I didn't make you do it. But so I feel a little sorry for her. I realize there's a cost benefit in her mind too. But she's super wealthy. Well, what did she ever do to get that wealth? I mean, we're complaining about our 1%, almost all of whom got their wealth by pleasing customers, not by some political deal, although I'm sure there are a few who really upped their net worth by political deals, and I don't consider that to be honestly gained wealth. But almost all of our 1% got there by working their tail off and doing things that help people in society. And the Queen of England is wealthy because for centuries, they had their foot on everybody else's neck and grabbed all kinds of property and wealth and so on, and is still paid a big fee. I mean, I suggested in that column years ago, they could have just hired somebody. Maybe you're not going to get them for minimum wage, but $15 maybe or $20, and they don a queen suit, and just like Disneyland, you've got the castle in England. People can still come. I understand tourism. I understand dollars. Anyway, so we did go on a good tangent there, but it just makes me kind of a little sick to think that people can rail against something and then it's right there in their face, but in a little slightly different form that they hadn't maybe thought about it before, and they're celebrating it. So
yeah, so if you saw the Queen, if you came into contact with the Queen, would you walk away from her and turn your back on her, or would you back away from her like you're supposed to?
Well, I don't know because I never really thought about it, but I had this idea when I was a kid that of writing first I had the idea of actually getting to Wimbledon and winning it, and then not bowing to the Queen after my victory, because I don't bow to queens. And I'm glad you showed up. You're like any other customer, but sorry, lady, I'm not bowing. And I thought, oh, that would be really cool. The only problem was I didn't quite get to Wimbledon or to the finals or win it. But then I had this idea of writing a novel, and in it, the character does that. So anyway, someday. So far, all I've got is this column.
Well, very good, very good. And we should mention what the column is. It's thisiscommonsense.com, where you write 5 days a week, and have been doing so since 1999.
Yes.
So there's a lot to read at thisiscommonsense.com. And I don't even know if I mentioned up front whether your name, Paul Jacob. So
Is that my name?
And I think I'll put your name down below, like I usually do, but later in the game. And the Queen may make you sick, but I'm actually sick, so that's one of the reasons my voice is kind of funny. And my name is Timothy Virkala. I'll put my name down there too, Timothy Virkala. I don't know why anyone cares, but that's the way it is. What else do you want to talk about this week? Speaking of queens, you want to go to Madame Guillotine, or do you want something else?
Let's go to Madame Guillotine, because I want to go on a long tangent on that too. You know me, but here is a case that this woman, her name is Bree Kidman, and prefers the pronouns, they and their. So their tweet showing her, she looks like a her in the picture. I'm backsliding already. But there's a picture, she's running for the Senate of the United States with a campaign logo that is a guillotine. And so you think maybe there's kind of a cute story behind this, that it pulls you in. Oh, those crafty marketers. No, no, there's no cute story. There's a bunch of people with their heads chopped off in France. And of course, in a minute, I want to talk about some people who had their heads chopped off in Germany, because there's an anniversary coming up tomorrow as we tape, but today as people will see the video, and on Sunday as the podcast goes out. The idea that you would literally use that symbolism and then double down on it, and that there just wouldn't be, and there was something of an outcry. I mean, I don't want to act like people went, oh yeah, what the heck, let's guillotine everybody. But this, to calculate that that's something you can say, and then to double down and actually speak to it, what kind of politics is that? And I'll tell you what kind it is. So let's go to the anniversary. On February 22nd, 1943, 77 years ago, the White Rose students, who had been captured, at least two of them, Hans and Sophie Scholl, brother and sister, I think, 22 or 20 and 22, something like that. Hans had been on the Eastern Front. They had been part of a group of students, the White Rose students, and Chris Schmorl, I hope I said that right, because I didn't check it before I came on, but Hans had the next pamphlet in his pocket, stupidly, which he would have said, and it had handwriting, and they were able to trace it back. So those three were at 5 p.m., executed by guillotine after a quick sham trial. They were part of a group that had sent leaflets all over Germany, and those leaflets ended up getting, I believe, to 6 different countries. Had tremendous penetration, considering that they were in Nazi Germany, and not at the beginning, but in 1943 as the war raged. And we have at Common Sense the pamphlets, the 6 pamphlets they distributed, and the 7th pamphlet that never got distributed, but that was pulled out of the archives. And Nazis were good at keeping things. And those are all at thisiscommonsense.com. I have just always been inspired by these people. Part of it was growing up in a big family that was very political. And when I went through my resisting the draft and went to prison for 5.5 months for refusing to register for conscription, involuntary servitude, I read the book A Noble Treason and was just blown away, and saw in the obviously much more serious and draconian things that happened to the Scholls, but saw how their family reacted, and remembered, knew how my family was reacting, because my parents were very supportive. They didn't necessarily say, hey, please don't register for the draft and get on TV and fight against it. But they believed in what I was doing, and thought I was politically right, even though they might have wished I'd just signed and moved along. And the whole, my brothers and sisters, just that whole, connection. And of course, Hans and Sophie Scholl, brother and sister. Hans had been arrested actually in 1937 because he was part of a youth group that was not approved by the government. And their father had been pulled in and interrogated by the Gestapo years before that. I think it was, I don't know when it was, I think it was late 30s, because he had told his secretary that Hitler was God's curse. And so, this was he had been a former mayor, and I can't recall the name of the town, but it was a mayor in the town they came from, which was close to Munich, where they had gone to school. And Hans was pre-med, and a lot of the people in there were pre-med involved in the White Rose. I believe it ended up being 6 or 7 who were executed. A number of them were arrested and held. A couple of them basically they held on long enough that they were in prison but didn't get executed, and the war ended and so on. But the courage and just the unwillingness to go along, this is kind of how they put it, that they just could not be part of this crime. And they knew the price of doing what they were doing. And they did it. And they, it's inspiring. It's not suggesting, I know some people look at it as like, well, what a crazy thing to do. It's a crazier thing to be part of that. And it always argues to me how important it is that, as Barney Fife, Andy Griffith's great deputy, would say, we nip it in the bud. When people talk about, well, we have freedoms in America that they don't have somewhere else, as if that's a defense for the lack of respect for our rights by the government, or an argument against someone who's complaining that the government is not doing the right thing here or there, or is doing bad things overseas or at the border or whatever. The idea that somehow because we have more freedom, we should put up with our government not respecting all of them is crazy, because we have to fight every day to maintain these freedoms. Our freedoms have helped other people get freedoms. And when other people, we've talked a lot, and we will later here in this podcast talk a little bit about Taiwan and Hong Kong and communist China. And I say communist because the party called the Communist Party that is totalitarian is running the country. But in all those things, when I see those students and young people and a few older people doing things in Hong Kong, I think they're doing it for me. And I know they're not there going, hey, Paul, he's in America and we better do this because he wants us to. I mean that what they are doing has a real, actual effect on my freedom here in America and everybody's freedom throughout the world, and that we are connected in those ways. And I don't want to overstate it. We're not all part of one mass, collective, but we are connected increasingly. And we need to have each other's back as much as we can. Expanding freedom anywhere gives the hope to people other places, and blocking tyranny anywhere helps us block it the next place and the next place. And we should probably segue with that. But I will tell people, if you're interested in the White Rose students and what they did in Germany, it's a neat story. It's inspiring to see anybody who has that kind of faith and courage. They were very religious, much more religious than I am. And they were very devout Christians. And I think that certainly, was part of their inspiration. But I think it's just a tremendous story. And there's lots if you Google it, you can find a lot. There's lots at thisiscommonsense.com. And we should segue to talk about the most deadly disease. And this was Monday's commentary. And it was basically, there's been so much news about the coronavirus. And I had posted some things on Facebook, but I don't know that I had written anything about the controversy over the World Health Organization and the fact that China increasingly pretty much tells everybody what to do and say throughout the world. I know the United States is giving a bunch of money to the UN, gives a bunch of money to the World Health Organization, but somehow we allow the World Health Organization that we're helping to fund to keep Taiwan out and not allow them to be part of it, even though when you think of this disease and when you think of SARS years ago, the track record in China is pretty doggone horrible. They're not a transparent, straightforward, honest society. And they also don't have the kind of connectiveness that people are working together like they would in a place like Taiwan. And of course, Taiwan has one of the best medical systems in the world from different rankings. And in some rankings have been ranked first. And so why on earth would the World Health Organization block them? Well, one reason: China says they have to block them. And so they were actually invited finally to be part of a meeting and to share some of what they're doing. But they had their first death in Taiwan over last weekend. And of course, there's been over 2,500 deaths in China now, and deaths in France and several other countries. But I thought what also came out over the weekend, and there really hasn't been that much news about it. It didn't seem to be a story that had many legs, but weeks before there was any public acknowledgement by the Chinese government that there was a problem, President Xi Jinping had a speech where he was talking to Communist Party insiders and talking about the virus. So it's obvious that at the highest levels of the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, they knew about it weeks before there was public acknowledgement, and they were warning people about it. So, that's a real problem. But one of the reasons I did the commentary, or I guess one of the other factors that happened, is that the doctor who first publicized it and was telling people about it, who actually had been arrested for that, died as well. And that wasn't over last weekend, but it was that last week. So again, that's, you see why maybe in that society, you don't come up and say, hey, we've got a real problem. You guys have to pay attention, because it can get you arrested. It can get you imprisoned. It can get you killed. And of course, he didn't die by the government. He died from trying to help people who have this terrible virus. But I also saw a great editorial in the Taipei Times in Taiwan. And I just wanted to read what I thought was the most important part, which was in the commentary. As more information leaks out from Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak, the editorial said, it is clear that Beijing was unable to prevent the virus from spreading out of control precisely because it lacks the accountability, freedom of speech, and free flow of information that form the bedrock of democracies. And this is not only important because this disease is a danger and we can see it, and we know, boy, in this case, what a terrible move. But it's important because I think so often we think about that, sometimes government has to take control. And you would almost think, and I think even I would almost think, and I don't usually think government should take control of anything, but I almost would think, boy, in a case like that, you might need the command and control that would say, hey, we're going to do this and this, and tell people they've got to stay here and you're quarantined and so on. But in societies where that's what you do, people don't take the right actions themselves, because of course they're waiting for someone else to take action, or they're scared to take the action, because if they take it and it's not exactly right, boom, off goes their head. And so that isn't the way it works. And of course, in societies where people are free, when something's bad's happening, we're not stupid. We don't walk off cliffs and, purposely drive our car, off the road into a tree. Not that those things don't happen occasionally, but there's usually some other things involved. We want to live. And so people, of course, take actions that protect their health. And I don't think you're going to have a problem in a free society saying in some cases we're going to quarantine people when you have something like this. And libertarians, of course, if you got a bunch of hardcore libertarians together, we'll argue about all kinds of what they can and can't do. But in the real world, I don't think there's really any opposition to government taking a role if they respect the people. And this is I think a great case of how you can see, even in a situation in which you would think a more command and control society would deal with the problem better. Oh, no, no, no. They deal with it much worse. And of course, this is the type of problem that it could be awfully disastrous.
And it sounds an awful lot like Friday's piece, The C Word Emerges, has links to this story, because here we have communism mentioned or lurking behind at least one, if not all, of the candidates for the Democratic nomination for the presidency.
You know, Bloomberg used the C word. And it's interesting because I was discussing with people the other day that, you know, that in some ways, Sanders might be, if a Democrat's going to be elected, Sanders might be the best for the country. And before people, you know, fall down or check their sound, here's why. And I'm not for Sanders, but in some ways, you don't know with other folks. With Sanders, he does believe in certain things. He is an ideologue. And so you can kind of count that he's, you know, going to do what he believes in. And occasionally his philosophy matches up with mine and probably matches up with yours. With mine, it might match up more in foreign policy. Although I would be a little afraid that, as we'll get to, he might be awfully friendly with the wrong countries. But I think Sanders would also create a groundswell of not just support, but understanding, which would make that support much stronger for stopping the march to socializing this country. And that there would be a reaction to Sanders, President Sanders, as great as the reaction to President Trump, if not greater. And with more, the opposition to Trump is so personal. The opposition to Bernie Sanders would not be personal. It would be ideological, and people would say, you know what? I'm not a big into political philosophies, but I like capitalism better than I like socialism. So I think there could be good things there, whereas I think all the other Democrats are likely to leap along the socialist road without ever admitting that that's the road they're on, whereas Sanders admitted it. And someone pointed out to me, but the truth is Sanders does not admit how far he wants to go, and bristles, as he did during the debate, when Bloomberg mentioned, hey, we've tried this. And of course, they were talking about Bernie Sanders' proposal to basically force big corporations to give 20% of their stock to their employees so that their employees controlled at least 20% of the company. And that's a government really micromanaging who owns and who sells. And of course, Bernie Sanders has oftentimes talked about he does want public ownership, meaning government ownership, of what he calls the major means of production. And of course, I pointed out, well, apparently he doesn't sweat, you know, Karl Marx wanted control of all the means of production. Bernie's not sweating the small stuff. He just wants control of the major means of production. I mean, it's Marxist lingo. And of course, Bernie Sanders, you know, he now it may have just been kind of the calendar that required him to honeymoon in the Soviet Union. But Bernie Sanders, you know, you ask him about the Soviet Union, of course, well, I'm not saying everything they did was good, you know, starving millions of Ukrainians and you know, killing so many of their own people and having no freedom of any kind whatsoever. You know, maybe that wasn't so good, although he won't mention the no freedom. That's kind of part of his agenda, I think, in the end. But he talks about the subways and how beautiful the subways are. And I had the wonderful opportunity to go to what was Russia right after it became Russia instead of the Soviet Union in 1993. And I've been to the Moscow subways, and they're absolutely gorgeous. Now, never for a moment did I think, hey, there's no freedom. You could get killed for all kinds of things. They might starve you to death. But boy, did they have good subways. I mean, it's a little bit like, well, I don't know what it's like. Who thinks about that? Well, it's the same thing with Castro. He said wonderful things about Castro. He educated his people. I think Bernie Sanders believes that the people in Cuba love Castro, because Bernie kind of loves Castro and loves the communist man of the people, but he's imprisoned people constantly. There's no freedom there either. And so we have this man running for president who I think increasingly looks very likely, unless, as we'll write about maybe next week, he doesn't win on the first ballot and the superdelegates who have been defanged on the first ballot in the Democratic Party's system come back in the second round. So if Bernie doesn't win on the first round, it's possible that all those superdelegates who are pledged to vote as their state's vote on the first ballot, who then are free to vote any way they want, well, they're all the insiders and they don't like Bernie. I mean, I think, what was it like 400-1 against? Yeah, I mean, it was some like 60 of them were for Bernie and 400 were for Hillary in 2016. It was some completely lopsided. And if I knew I was going to mention it, I would have maybe gone to thisiscommonsense.com and used the search function to pull that script, because we were one of the first people to talk about how big a deal the superdelegates were in 2016. And I think we should start talking about it again, because if it's a brokered convention, if it goes past that first ballot, all of a sudden there's this built-in wedge against Bernie Sanders. And I don't think Sanders is going to be too happy about that, or his people, and they have every right not to be happy about it. But anyway, we have someone who's likely to win, who calls himself a socialist, and who likes communists. He likes them. He likes what they do. He doesn't like their excesses when they kill people for no reason. He doesn't like that. But he likes them. And he thinks the fact that they kill people should not blind us or imprison them for speaking out, for nothing other than speaking out, should not blind us to the education their system produces or to the health care that they provide. So if you give people stuff, you can kill some of them. And not that it's okay to kill them, but just that we should be very understanding and maybe kind of support that political philosophy. Anyway, it's going to be a heck of an interesting year. That's what I keep thinking. Wow. It seemed like years ago, I thought, boy, we live in crazy times, and we just are going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. The old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times.
People talk about how good the education is in communist countries, and I'm dubious. However, there's a reason we would expect that to be true. Why would we believe that education would be better than other public goods in a communist country? Because in a communist country, they need to program the people. And how do you program the people? Well, the first method is public education. Oh, don't say that. Communist education, which is an interesting problem, which I think should give Americans some pause about their education system.
It should. And that is such a great point. And it reminds me of what might seem like a tangent point, but we should be paying attention to our education system. And one of the reasons I'm for school choice and creating a huge marketplace is because I want people to be able to choose and not all be getting the same indoctrination. If I were doing it, I might indoctrinate you. You might think that because I have certain beliefs, and you can only expect people to be teaching from what they believe is why there ought to be a lot of choice. But it's interesting too, because it's also why there've been a lot of talk about lowering the voting age, and more in liberal circles than conservative circles, and more in liberal places than conservative places. But I have opposed lowering it to any age below what is currently the majority age, because you would be having people vote who are in compulsory situations. They're having to go to school every day. They're having to listen to people talk about government and politics. And of course, I think we know from, well, I've been involved in Freedom of Information Act efforts all across the country, looking at political activity in the public schools, using public school resources to engage in them. And it's a huge problem. It's not going to be talked about a whole lot because it doesn't fit the narrative that most of the media wants to talk about, but it's a huge problem. And it happens again and again and again. The teachers' unions are very political. And there are people, not every teacher's political like that, most of them aren't, but there are teachers who are, and they are able to use that apparatus. And it's also why, Bernie Sanders, I thought, again, shows why, he's willing to say things. I think it's why young people like him so much. And frankly, it's what I like about him. I can't find much, but this I like. He came out for voting that felons should still be voting. If they're in prison, they should still be voting because everyone has a right to be represented and everyone has a right to vote. And I can respect that position. I think it's wrong. I don't want people who are under someone else's custody voting. I want people voting only who are under their own custody. And so I don't favor that. I favor restoring rights. And of course, I also favor restoring Second Amendment rights a lot more than get restored. But I favor that as soon as someone has served their sentence, but not when they're under somebody else's care and feeding.
You would think at this point we'd got to the place where we'd end our talk for the week. However, there is one piece that you wrote that we haven't talked about yet, and that was a rock star? Chrissie Hynde.
Chrissie Hynde. There were a couple of Pretender songs that I really liked, Back on the Chain Gang, and what was it? But we got just about every song of theirs I liked into what was, I think, Wednesday's script. And that was fun. That was a lot of fun for me. I don't know if it was fun for anybody else, but you guys have to decide that. But the whole point of that script was, here was a rock star who was liberal, who did an open letter with tweets on Twitter, and she does an open letter to Trump, and she never really congratulated Trump or was effusive in any praise for Trump, but she was very respectful and nice, and the clear impression was, thank you for recognizing Rush Limbaugh. And she admitted she didn't agree with Rush Limbaugh, but her late father, and I have a thing for, I've got 3 daughters, and I have a thing for daughters loving their dads. I don't know. I like it. I think it's a good thing. And she loved her dad, and she disagreed. She said she disagreed with her dad all the time, but then made the wonderful point that, but isn't that what America's all about? That you can disagree and that you can do it without getting your head chopped off. And that, it just was such a powerful, subtle message. I just thought it was wonderful. And, the other thing that she did, which to me made it even better, is then she lobbied Trump. She's not fooling around. Thank you very much. She said thank you. She made the point, which was so important, but then she was right back on offense, or she was on offense before, but she was right there to lobby for him to leave Julian Assange alone and to pardon him, because I guess he has been charged now, so he would have to pardon him, but pardon him already. And she made the point that, maybe he did break the law, and maybe what he did was wrong. But he believed he was defending freedom. He believed he was doing something good, and he has suffered enough. And please consider my plea. And I respect that. And I think this week, there was so much with the pardons, and we have talked about at Common Sense through the years back. We started talking about the pardon process that the president has back when Bill Clinton used it to pardon Mark Rich, who was a fugitive from justice, had never turned himself in, whose relatives had given hundreds of thousands of dollars, and who got pardoned on the run. Very, very unusual. Usually you're serving your sentence or you've already served it, but you're not avoiding, not that I'm arguing for people to, come turn themselves in or anything, but it really is a little different to have given that. And I think some of Trump's pardons, people in their families had given money, large sums of money to different things, Trump campaign or different Trump efforts. And it's a huge problem. And yet I love this power because to me, it's almost, I'm not worried about the one guy who shouldn't go free. I'm worried about all the people who should go free. And if I were the president, I would, whatever office they have, I would ask for volunteers to beef it up 2 or 3 or 50 times what it is, to look at cases where we could help somebody regain the life they ought to have because they've served a long enough sentence and they deserve it, because the crime they were convicted of is not a crime at all. I have to, I was very critical of Obama, but I have to say his use of the pardon power and commutations, and is that the right way to say that? And all of that was excellent, and excellent compared to the others. He could have done even more, but it was excellent in that he did it and others were not doing it. It was largely on criminal justice matters and drug offenders that got completely outrageously long sentences. So if I were president, for one, I would say the drug war is over, because no one's going to be arrested and convicted of a crime as part of the drug war without getting a pardon from me. And overnight, the drug war is over. The states can do it if they want. I don't think they will. They're rushing the other direction, as I think smart people are. But that's what I would do. And I would also, though, use it for mercy. And we need that mercy in our system. It is a damn shame that this wonderful pardon power is used almost always to reward political cronies and used as a political, how do I help the rich and powerful avoid consequences? And I don't say that all of Trump's pardons have been that way. They haven't. I've liked some of his pardons, a lot of his pardons, but too often I think they're used in political, obnoxious ways. Of course, president can pay a price for that too. Anyway, it's mercy is a good thing. In free societies, it's important to have the rule of law, but it's also important to have this element that can help restore justice when things get out of hand. And I think the public should be more engaged in it in terms of pushing it. And I think it should be used a lot more. And I think there should be real repercussions for using it in a political, outrageous way instead of using it in a decent way. And the American people, we know the difference. I'm not sure presidents always do, but we do. On that note, I think we should release our mass audience to restore peace and harmony and prosperity to the land.
And that's my cue to wrap this up and thank the audience for listening to us for almost an hour. You can read Paul Jacob at thisiscommonsense.com 5 days a week and catch the podcast at YouTube and on his site and on SoundCloud on the weekends. Thank you.